So we're about 2 weeks away from the presidential election. How do you see things right now?
Uh, that is things are really just back and forth. I'd say that's the perfect way to say it. I for one have been keeping up with the polls and recently the early voting trends. And one thing I've seen since, the DNC and since the presidential debate, that it's kind of stagnated. Like there was a point where, VP Harris, some metrics had her, like I know 538, that's a poll, or that's a firm that I constantly check. And I'm pretty sure her peak, she was about a 64% chance of winning. And now Trump's at a like 52 to 54% chance last I saw. So it's just back and forth. It's a lot of whiplash.
So you think it's really close right now?
That's the perception that I feel this election is giving off. A lot of what I'm seeing is, there's a chance that a lot of, right-wing pollsters might be skewing things, or, the Gen Z and new voter, demographics haven't been properly counted. And I, for one, haven't exactly fact-checked that, so I can't, I can't really quantify any of that. But it's just,
With the Gen Z vote, that is a new demographic that's coming up in this election. Which candidate do you think will win that vote?
Ooh, I think overall it will go to Kamala Harris. I have noticed that Gen Z men are shifting more and more towards the right. Just because I feel like Trump has that kind of gravitas. I mean, he's like the WWE guy, he's the big personality, and I feel like my peers really like that. I mean, I was one of the types. I was like, yeah, this guy's pretty funny, he's pretty cool. I wasn't old enough to vote, but I was like, yeah, I think it would just be cool if he was the president just because. And then alternatively, for the Harris-Walz campaign, you have issues like, reproductive rights that gets women of all ages out to vote. So all in all, I think she'll win the Gen Z vote about a 60-40 split maybe.
With Kamala Harris, do you see her entering the race after Biden dropping out? Do you see that as a big energizing factor for Democratic voters?
Definitely. And this is something I could testify to, because me personally, for the past couple of years, I'd considered myself independent, somewhere between liberal and libertarian. Nowadays, I'm more inclined to call myself a Democrat, maybe going a little bit further than, regular, like, mainstream modern day liberal. But could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So
Just
with
like
Kamala Harris, what about Kamala? What does Kamala bring to the table that Biden was just lacking?
Right. The energizing. Yeah. So I was one that was frustrated with the fact that it was Trump versus Biden, and that RFK just kind of loomed over everything. Like, hey, I'm still here, which not really, but with the addition of Kamala Harris, it just brings a new face. I mean, a lot of times I feel like you see that people are calling her a breath of fresh air, and I believe that to be true. I mean, she's younger. She's, I hate to go off of identity politics, but she's not a rich old white man. I mean, that's one thing that gets a lot of like the minority vote. Someone that looks like them, that representation, and you see it in places like Philadelphia and Detroit, those metro areas, Atlanta, where you have like, an educated, say, older black population or middle-aged black population that somebody like Kamala Harris, I feel like would be more inclined to get them to vote than somebody like Joe Biden.
What issues matter most to you?
I feel like what matters to me. So I'm going to break this up into long term and short term. I want to start with the short term. Short term, what matters to me is my safety and well-being as a young black man. I recognize that there are unique challenges to being black, being a man, and I feel like that me personally, I would be better off with, Kamala Harris in the White House rather than Donald Trump, especially not solely because of Trump. I mean, I consider him an issue, but aside from just him, you have that entire faction of the Republican Party, men like Ron DeSantis or women like our governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, that are, attacking, DEI and, social programs and whatnot, and attacking. And one thing that I've been more keen about recently is, the challenge to ban books. And you look at, you find a list and you see why I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, and, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I mean, it's just, basically what I'm getting at is a lot of the culture war stuff that's been pushed by the Trump wing of the Republican Party is just running us into the ground. And I feel like Kamala Harris in the short term will bring that new culture. Now for the long term, I will say I'm not going to say promised, but I plan on inheriting land out in the country near where I grew up. And there's, I was thinking about, starting a farm and, putting property down there, having hunting land. So, I mean, I feel like the economy, I feel like is a long-term issue. That's my biggest long-term issue, but.
Okay.
I'm sorry if that was long and drawn out.
That's awesome. With Donald Trump, so you talked about the culture war aspect of the right wing within Trump's Republican Party. What is the biggest turnoff specifically with Trump that you have?
So a lot of it in the now, it's just like the rhetoric. I mean, I could go on about what turns me off. If I could start with where I've originally hopped off the Trump train, I was officially done. There was nothing he could do to ever buy me back. Was January 6th. So since then, I've kind of, taken the rose-tinted goggles off and started looking at things more critically. And not even just at Trump, but looking at things across the aisle more critically. And it's just the rhetoric, the backpedaling on, debates and his medical records and whatnot. I don't like his running mate. That's another thing. I don't like how close, no matter how much he denies it, how close he is tied to Project 2025. And I'm wanting to be, a teacher. So I read, a good portion. Well, I skimmed through the education portion for the most part. And I'm looking at a lot of, what Arkansas is currently having that I'm griping about, which is, the school vouchers. And, you can't ignore abolishing the Department of Education. So stuff like that is what really keeps me away from Trump, as well as the tariffs and his, the mental acuity and how close he is with with his sympathy for Putin and men like Putin and Viktor Orban. I can't get behind it.
Okay, cool. We could talk about a little bit before we wrap up here with foreign policy.
Okay.
So, how do you see the current state of foreign policy?
I feel like, could you elaborate on that?
So a lot of, not only Republicans, but lots of independents I've talked to, and some Democrats, are very concerned with the way things are going in Ukraine and
Right.
Israel right now, the MiG to hot wars happening.
Right.
Do you think that these wars are a product of the administration, or is that just...
Nah, because one talking point that I always see is the fact that, Trump had no wars during his administration, and none of this in Gaza or in Ukraine would have happened if Trump was in office. But I don't think it's, let me put it this way. While the president is the most powerful and important person on the planet doesn't exactly revolve around the president. You get what I'm saying? Putin isn't exactly looking at who is in the Oval Office to see if he wants to annex Crimea or take a chunk of land from the east side of Ukraine. I don't think that's how he operates. He operates on his own time, as autocrats do. And I think the state of foreign policy, we do walk a tight line with, I think more in the regards of what's going on in the Middle East than in Eastern Europe. I believe a Kamala Harris presidency will be better for Eastern Europe because she'll be tougher on Putin while showing more support for Ukraine, which is something that not only Trump, but plenty of, those in the Republican base don't see eye to eye with. They don't want anything going to anybody that isn't an American citizen, which is fine, but you got to look at the nuance. As for the Middle East, that's something that for the longest I didn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. I didn't want to have an opinion on it because as a lifelong Christian and, my mom raised me in the church and she's a very old soul. And she's one of those types that, like, if anything negative's going on in the world, it's a sign of the end times. And one of the main ones is, there's going to be a war in Israel and whatnot. That's one of the main signs of the end times. But so a lot of, I felt morally convicted to have, an opinion that aligned with my theological beliefs. And now I'm starting to shake past that cognitive dissonance. But it's just,
it's a very complex
It's a very complex, because it's not the same as Europe, where it's like, in the Middle East, you had the colonial powers carving everything up, and then 30 years later, they just bring an additional group of people, and it's just like, it's so much history, but I think all in all that, I can't exactly remember the context, but I do remember. It might not even been from this election cycle, but I remember Trump saying something about Israel finishing the job. And I mean, he's been hard on Iran before, and now it's looking to be, Israel versus Iran rather than Israel versus an Iran proxy. So I just feel like a steadier hand and steadier leadership would be best, and that would be Kamala Harris ultimately.
Just one last question going off of that. Have you seen President Biden as a quote-unquote steady hand?
I think, a steady hand as in overall leadership or in the Middle East?
In the foreign policy aspect of things?
I feel like Joe Biden might be, in terms of foreign policy. Okay, I'm trying to make sure I've got my facts straight, just because in terms of foreign policy, I hadn't been paying as much attention until, once things really started kicking off in Ukraine. And I mean,
It's all right if you don't have an opinion.
no, it's just so, the only thing I can say is, I remember there was the point where Biden wouldn't sign the ceasefire that had been written up a few months back, and I was really mad about that. I never looked to see what the terms were. It could have been something as bad as every Palestinian, but like 30 are spared, but you get to keep. It could have been something crazy as that, knowing Benjamin Netanyahu, and I still would have been mad and uninformed. But that tangent aside, I mean, I don't know as much about Biden in terms of foreign policy. I mean, I feel like he's done good to the people of Ukraine, because the fact that they've been able to hold Russia back this long is pretty unprecedented, honestly. And if you want to go into, like trade, I feel like Biden's done a bit better from what I've seen than Trump has in terms of this trade war against China. We kept some of his tariffs while still utilizing them in a way, like, with the semiconductor chips, keeping American-made products in America. So I feel like overall, from what I've seen, he hasn't been too bad. In terms of just being an overall leader, one thing I feel like, hot take, I feel like Joe Biden has been the best president of the 21st century up until this point.
Really?
It's a hot take of mine, and that's my hill that I'm
Wow. Okay.
willing to stand on.
Before we wrap up,
Right.
with that statement, I'd like to ask, just understanding your thoughts. Joe Biden was trying to stay in the race, and then was forced pretty much to drop out. If he was the best president, why do you think he had to drop out?
Because I feel like that just goes back to leadership. And that's another reason why I kind of give him that, that, I guess, title up until this point. Because he was mature enough to see that, okay, it is the American people I'm not going to say the American people versus Donald Trump, but basically it's one idea for this country versus another. Two very unique, very fundamentally different ideas. And for the current, I guess, not current, that makes it seem like the status quo, but for the vision that the Biden-Harris administration, now the Harris-Walz campaign, has been trying to, this picture that they've been trying to paint, it could only be obtained by stopping Trump. And that can only be achieved by switching candidates. I do believe that, Biden and whoever else, a lot of people want to say, oh, Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris forced them out. I don't believe all that. But, whoever was in Biden's ear, or, Biden himself, whoever, came up with the idea that, maybe dropping out is for the best. After the debate performance, maybe dropping out is for the best. And I think it was, honestly.
Okay, cool. We'll wrap up here with one last question, kind of end on a lighter note.
Okay.
What do you think about Trump McDonald's?
So at first I thought it was funny, because I mean, like I said, it's still Trump. He still has that allure, that brought the majority of his base in 2016 and retained it in 2020. He still knows how to entertain, but I was kind of disappointed to see that they had to shut it down and kind of like tailor it in a way. Like I heard they were screening people coming through the drive-through, which I mean makes sense. I mean, he's had 2 assassination attempts, so I mean it does make sense. But I don't know. It just. I mean, I worked at McDonald's as well, and I'm just saying, 20 minutes in front of the fryer isn't the same as a full shift in the hottest part of the restaurant on your feet. It's not the same. And I get what he was trying to do, but I will say it was funny that, I think it just shows, because while I'm over here laughing about it, it shows kind of how petty he is in the way that, Kamala Harris really, I guess, resonates with him, lives rent free in a way to where something as trivial as her working at McDonald's during during her time in college was enough to make him act on that. And like just a couple of days ago, he was canceling events and ending interviews early due to exhaustion, and now he's working at a McDonald's. Like it's funny, but I feel like me personally, I'm laughing more at him than with him.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, this was fun. I hope I wasn't all over the place.
No,
this was fun.